can you perhaps explain in a few words how serious the energy crisis is today?
There is no energy crisis in the world. We didn't invented renewable energy because of climate change. We invented because of the oil shock in the 70s. Mr. Putin is not stupid. He knows that the future for him is not the pipeline to transport gas, but LNG.
Hello and welcome back to the Brussels Signal Studio. My name is Justin Stairs and we're going to be talking today about energy policy, the energy crisis here in Europe. We have a specialist for you. His name is Samuele Furfari, Professor Furfari, who is a chemical engineer and lecturer at the Free University of Brussels, where he received his doctorate. Importantly, between 1982 and 2018, he was a senior official at the European Commission, the Commission's Directorate General for Energy, to be precise, where he specialized in energy, technology, and policy. Since 2003, he has been a professor of energy geopolitics at the Free University of Brussels, and he lectures at many other universities. He is the author of 10 books on energy and sustainable development and many articles. Between 2019 and 2022, he was president of the European Society of Engineers and Industrialists. He is also Knight of the Order of Merit of the Republic of Poland, which goes back to his student days. When Poland was still behind the Iron Curtain. Welcome, Professor. Thank you for finding some time.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Let's talk about the energy crisis. We hear a lot about Europe's energy crisis. Can you perhaps, in layman's terms that we can all understand, explain in a few words how serious the energy crisis is today?
First of all, we should say where there is an energy crisis, because there is no energy crisis in the world. I suppose that we will come back to that. The world is full of energy, particularly a lot of gas in the world. So there is certainly not the type of crisis that we had in the 70s in the world. In Europe, well, in the EU, better say, we have a crisis that we have created ourselves because we have neglected our security of supply. The EU is lacking energy resources, or at least is lacking cheap energy resources. It's not the same. We are lacking cheap energy resources. So we need to import energy resources from other continents. But we have neglected that because those last 5, 8 years, we have insisted that we do not need any more fossil fuels and everything will be wind and solar, and therefore we should not pay attention to the security of supply. And it's why we are in a serious difficulty today with the price of energy 2, 3 times for electricity more expensive than in USA, and maybe 4 times more expensive for gas that we have in the world. So we have created our crisis, while in the 70s it was the OPEC countries which have created the crisis.
Right, in the 70s, you're referring to the so-called oil shock back then, which saw oil prices increase very fast and almost overnight. Now, to what extent is this energy crisis in Europe the result of energy policy and the push towards alternative fuels? And to what extent is it the result of the Ukraine war and the lack of cheap Russian gas?
In the year 2000, the commission was directed by Romano Prodi, and the vice president of the commission was the Spanish lady Loyola de Palacio.
Yes, I
And
remember her.
a great woman. I was working with her. It's really a great woman. And she worked on the security of supply, and we published at that time a green paper on the energy security of supply. And I was at the time the in charge of information and communication, so I knew even today the contents of this green paper because I was repeating that like a parrot at that time. And there were three topics in the green paper. First of all, to ensure the security of supply, we need to diversify the sources of energy. That means that we need to look at all type of energies, of course, renewable energy, of course, but also what we call, or what Mrs. De Palacio called, the taboo energies, nuclear and coal. And she was very clear on that. We cannot have the luxury to avoid nuclear and coal in the EU. Second, diversification. Diversify the country where we import energy. And behind the mind was, of course, diversify from OPEC country for oil, but also gas from Russia. And the third diversification was diversify the route or the means how we import energy in the EU. With the time, we progressively dropped the three strategies. We have said we do not need nuclear energy, let alone coal. We can continue to import massively from Russia. And it's not a problem if everything nearly passed by Ukraine. Three big mistakes that have created the difficulties. And then to come back to your question, the war in Ukraine have nothing to do with that. Those are old strategies that we have neglected. Of course, when the war arrived, everything emerged, but it was prepared long before. So the mistakes have been that we have neglected our security of supply and believing that tomorrow everything will be green and will be wind and solar. Terrible mistake, which the world is not doing. And the world is going in the direction of more fossil fuel, more fossil fuel, more fossil fuel, and nuclear also.
Right, we could talk for 30 minutes about nuclear energy, I guess, but before we even touch on that subject, I'd like to ask why. I mean, is this gross negligence? Why has the work of Loyola and De Palacio been dropped? Why?
Well, there is not one single reason. There are various reasons. One of that, and I know that it's not politically correct to mention that, is the growing impact of the green in Europe, and particularly in Strasbourg. When everybody has been impregnated by the mentality of the green, it was so easy to say, okay, everything will be green tomorrow. And the problem is that today we have green in all parties. There is not one single party in Europe which is not green. And so we continue to repeat the same thing. We will do everything with wind and solar energy. Even Mr. Draghi, I respect him because he's a great European man, a great banker. But its energy analysis is totally fake. He recognized the difficulty that we have with the price of energy, and his conclusion is to say, well, we need to do more renewable energy. That's incredible, but it's just the problem that we have. We have focused so much on renewable energy that we have an increase of price. I think it's important. I would like, if you allow me, to take 1 second on that. In the year 2000, the commissioner for 2010, the commissioner for energy was Mr. Günther Oettinger, a German, and
Yeah.
he knew that the price of energy was exaggerated. It was not normal to have this price of energy. And he asked the services of the Commission to make a study and to publish report on the price of energy. It was the first time that the Commission looked at the price of energy, because before that we were looking at many aspects of energy, but not at the cost to the citizen. And this was 2010, far before 2014 with the Crimea issue, and far before 22 with the war in Ukraine. We knew that the price of energy is increasing because of the development of renewable energy. Renewable energy are expensive. It is why there are directives to oblige the production. If it was cheap, there was no necessity to have a directive obliging the production. But not only they are expensive to produce, they create a mess in the electricity network, obliging efficient power plant to stop when there is a production of green energy, and this stop and go increase the price of electricity for everybody. And so we have this huge problem of the price of electricity in Europe, not because of Mr. Putin, not because of the war in Ukraine, but because we have selected the most expensive energy to produce renewable energy.
Right. Okay,
Electricity,
I
sorry,
understand.
electricity.
Now, so to what is the potential of alternative energy? Because I guess you could say, look, the technology is improving all the time. Windmills are becoming more efficient. They're looking at new ways to produce alternative energy. What is the potential, in your opinion?
First of all, to answer your question, we should remind that we start to look at that during the oil crisis, the shock, as you mentioned it before. We didn't invented renewable energy because of climate change. We invented because of the oil shock in the 70s. So it's now more than 45 years that we look to produce cheap wind or solar electricity. It's not new. It's old technology. And of course, as you say, we have improved. But the fundamental of the issue is not the technology. The machines are wonderful. Well, they have some problem also. If we have time, we can mention that. But it's not a machine problem. The problem is the wind and solar are not continuous. And therefore, you have stop and go, and even long period, including weeks without wind. So, what are you going to do when there is no alternative energy? You are obliged to go back to the old solution. And this is increasing the cost of a generation. So, it's not a question of a technology, it's not a question of policy because the EU have made all it can to promote renewable energy, but it's just nature. The nature obliges to admit that we cannot have 100% of our energy with renewable energy. Furthermore,
Okay, go ahead.
furthermore, furthermore, wind, solar, and nuclear produce electricity. And the final use of energy is not electricity, it's mainly heating. Electricity represents 22% of the demand of energy, the final demand, the energy that we, citizen or industry,
Yes.
use. Electricity is 22%. What are we going to do with the 78%, which cannot be renewable because it's not wind and solar, it's not electricity? This is the main problem of politics, that we ignore the basic of energy. We need flames. Energy is before everything flames, and all the processes in industry are flames, heating if you want. And if you want to heat your house, you need flames. Don't dream that we will do everything with electricity. That's not true. It's not physically possible. Therefore, looking only to renewable or even nuclear, it's a strong mistake that even Mr. Draghi is making. If you look at the report of Mr. Draghi, he mentioned a few times uh, uh, natural gas, but saying that in 6 year time we get rid of gas. You imagine in 6 year time no more gas in Europe. And he mentioned once in a report once the word oil when the world is running for oil and gas. So if we do not change our perception that energy is not only electricity, we will continue to have troubles.
Okay, now for those who don't know, the so-called Draghi report was a report by Mario Draghi, who's the former chief of the European Central Bank, and he was charged with coming up with a report on EU competitiveness. So we looked at
Correct.
all aspects of EU competitiveness, including energy. And as you said, he believes that the solution is more alternative energy. Now you're saying that essentially this is wrong. He's made a mistake because alternative energy cannot supply Europe with the heat that it needs. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, exactly. We should. I'm not against renewable energy. There is a place for that, but don't dream that everything will be done with that. That's just impossible, and even very expensive. Expensive and not possible to make complete use of energy with wind and solar. Just impossible physically.
I'm curious because obviously you spent a long time at the European Commission, and I presume you had these ideas or you had this position when you were at the European Commission. Is this position shared by many people here in Brussels in the EU institutions?
Yes, but not in public.
Right.
Of course, there are a lot of people knowing what I'm saying, but it's difficult for my colleagues still inside the commission to say that publicly because it's not the official policy. The official policy is that we should go to net zero, and this is just impossible. But outside the EU institution, of course, there are a lot of people, and mainly the industry. You know, the industry know exactly that it's impossible, but they are afraid to say that publicly. As soon as you say that publicly, you appears that you are not a friend of the environment. You do not respect the next generation, and so you imagine you can invent all the name. But yes, I know that a lot of people are thinking like me, but it's difficult to say.
Can we touch on nuclear energy, please? Because I would like your expert opinion. Um, uh, Nuclear energy, as I understand it, from the limited reading that I have done, poses a number of potential problems. But perhaps we could focus on waste, number one, and also the dangers involved with nuclear power plants. Now, you correct me if I'm wrong, but as I understand it, these power plants need a constant supply of water. And according to what I read, anyway, one of the dangers is, and we're seeing this now perhaps in Ukraine, is if the water supply is cut off, there can be catastrophic explosions. Now, is that correct?
It's correct if the engineers running the plant were stupid, but the engineers running the plant are not stupid. And the engineers which have conceived the plant are not stupid. And the legislation of the member state uh, regarding nuclear has been made by clever man and not stupid man. So everything is under control. The fact that there is no more water is not something sudden. It's not that a river passing by a nuclear power plant will stop to flow in 1 second. This is not the case. So the flow of water is always there and is very, very rare when there is not enough water to cool down the plant, as you mentioned. And if this will happen, it will not happen in 1 hour so that the operator have the time to close down the power plant and there will be no problem. And I'm not aware of any single power plant having had this problem except Fukushima. Because in Fukushima, it was not a nuclear disaster, it was a tsunami disaster. And the problem is the flooding which enter into the power plant and the pump that were used to cool the reactor that you mentioned, the pump were at the ground level, which nobody do that normally. All the pump are on the top, precisely for this question. It was an exception in Fukushima because the plant, the number three, was an old plant and it should have been stopped because it was reaching its age. And so the owner of the plant said, well, it's not necessary to move the pump because it's very unlikely that there will be a tsunami higher than 14 meters. The wall was of 14 meters, but the tsunami was more than 14 meters. So they flew the pump, which should have not been there, and therefore there was the problem of eating. But it was not a nuclear explosion, it was a hydrogen explosion. All the friends that would like to push for hydrogen technology should remind that Fukushima is a hydrogen explosion. If you want, we can discuss on details on that. But no, there is no danger for water in nuclear power
And
plants.
what about the waste issue? Obviously, there is this half life, very long half life of the waste. It stays radioactive for many years, correct?
Correct, correct. Many, many, many years. But the quantity of waste which are produced are extremely limited, and they are under control in all countries. There are legislation to oblige, EU legislation to oblige to control that, to keep the control down. There is the technology of vitrification. That means that we will come back on the word waste. The waste are put into glasses. So you know that glasses are not you cannot dissolve glasses, and this is placed in inox cylinder, which are placed in caves, argil caves. So all the measure are controlled, and there is not since more than 40 years one single incident on this question. But even more, what we call waste is not a proper name. We should use the word spent fuel. A spent fuel is a fuel which cannot be used in the two-day reactor. The two-day reactor produce uh, a byproduct, which is still uranium, but not enough to be operated again in the same reactor. It's not a waste, it's still full of energy. But to use that, we need new technologies. And the new technologies is called Generation 4. And the European Commission is working since the 60s on that technology to produce new type of reactor, for example, high temperature gas reactor or helium cooled reactor, which are in preparation in a number of countries, and even China have already a plant like that. Those plants will operate it with what you call, or we call today, spent fuel.
Interesting. But on the subject of aging reactors, you and I both live in Belgium, and there are a number of very old reactors which cause concern for Belgium's neighbours and indeed for some people living in Belgium. At one point, I had the right to free, is it iodine pills that you're supposed to take if there's an accident? Anyway, it was quite concerning. Should we be concerned about the age and state of Belgium's reactors?
Not at all. Uh, Nuclear power plant are constantly uh, controlled, and if there is something to be changed, it's changed. It's like your car. Your car is not exactly the same that it was when you bought it, because there are pieces of spare parts which are changed. It's the same thing with nuclear power plant, except the vessel. The vessel is inert. There is no problem with the vessel. It doesn't change. And therefore, inside, if there are things which have been to be changed, they are changed, like you have the spare part in your cars. Even more, uh, the US administration, the nuclear US administration, have allowed the expansion of life in nuclear power plant for the next 20 years. So they arrive at the end of their life, official life decided in the 80s, and now they extend the life for the next 20 years because there is no reason to stop a plant like that. And I don't know if you have heard this week that Microsoft is wanting to reopen 3 Mile Island, a nuclear power
Yes.
plant in USA, because of course you cannot expect to develop II without new electricity capacity. II will need a lot of electricity. That's why we
Artificial
need new
intelligence,
power
right.
plants. Everywhere in the world will need power plant, let alone the
Hmm.
electrical car. Just for internet and II, we will need much more electricity. So we need nuclear power plant and all type of power plant.
So here in the European Union, it seems to me that the member states are split on the subject of nuclear energy. You have countries such as France who are very pro nuclear energy and which have announced large investments. And on the other side of the coin, you have countries such as Germany which have closed their nuclear, phased out nuclear power. Is it fair to say that the EU is split?
Yes, yes, it's very split. Uh, on one side, we have Germany, Luxembourg, Austria, and maybe a Denmark in a way. And on the other side, you have all the others, and not only France. We are seeing a real renaissance of nuclear interest everywhere in Europe. Just an example, the Dutch government, the previous government, not this one, has decided that they want to build 3 nuclear power plants. And of course, the new government is totally in favor of that. Furthermore, I would like to remind you that Article 1 of the Euratom Treaty, signed in 1957, say that the community, the nuclear community, uh, have for the aim is to improve the quality of life of EU citizens through the development of the nuclear industry. Article 1 of a treaty which is still in force. So, if the European Union is serious about the respect of the treaty, they should not be neutral on nuclear energy like it is for time being, but they should be proactive. Article 1 of the Euratom Treaty say that we should develop nuclear energy. So if Germans do not want, that's their problem. But the Commission should have a strong role on nuclear energy. It was the case in the
Right.
past. There is no reason not to continue.
Right. And so, how would you describe the policy of the European Commission today? Because it seems to me that from where I'm sitting anyway, they're not quite sure. There's been this battle about financing nuclear power and whether it should be categorized as green or not. I mean, how would you describe the Commission policy today?
Normally, it's an old battle because 2 years ago, 3 years ago, the Commission, directed by Mr. Franz Timmermans, didn't want to consider nuclear energy as a clean energy for the future of Europe. And so they exclude it from what we call the taxonomy. Taxonomy is a kind of labeling saying to the banks, this is good technology for our future. And nuclear was excluded, and indeed it was just wind and solar in this taxonomy. But France, Poland, Finland, Czechia, and all the other have opposed to that. And Mr. Timmermans has been, in a way, humiliated because he had to revise its, uh, its taxonomy. And so it is in the taxonomy nowadays. The problem is not finished because there are still Germany, which is strongly opposed to this for the political reason that you can imagine. And I would like to give you a recent, very recent example. Probably 3 weeks ago, the rumor circulated that the commissioner for energy will be the Czech minister for economy, uh, Mr. Josef Sikela. And so a lot of people in the energy sector were happy to see that there will be a serious man taking the place to deal with the energy policy. And to the surprise of everybody, when last week Mrs. von der Leyen announced the new commission, she announced that the portfolio for energy will be in the hand of Mr. Dan Jorgensen, the today Minister of Energy in Denmark, which loudly and constantly repeat that he is against nuclear energy. So you see the contradiction. We were calm, saying, okay, if Germany do not want, no problem, but do not limit the other countries to deal with nuclear energy. And what Mrs. von der Leyen do? She pick somebody which is totally against nuclear energy as commissioner for energy. I don't know what
Okay.
happens in between the two. Maybe Berlin caller say try to put somebody which will help us. I don't know, but this is a quite a surprise that Mr. Sikela has been changed to Mr. Jorgensen. And I
Okay.
suppose that yes,
No, I was just going
go
to
ahead.
say, but if I go back to what you were saying earlier, in any case, you believe that nuclear is not the solution either. That it's that the help that it can provide Europe is limited. Correct?
Yes, yes, because electricity is not all. Exactly, you understood. Electricity is not all. So we need nuclear energy for the electricity generation, and we need also some solar panel and so on. But we will not escape from the massive use of natural gas. This is the big mistake of the Commission today, and also the big mistake of Mr. Draghi, which say that in 6 years' time we will not use any more gas. How can you operate a factory without gas? Will you produce steel and even beer or bricks or glasses without gas? It's just impossible. All the heavy industry and also SME need gas. It's why Germany have a problem because they neglected their security of supply of gas, and now the chemical industry is in deep trouble because they have not cheap gas. So the
Mm.
future of
And
energy is not to neglect gas.
right. It seems to me that the solution, at least in the last couple of years, has been to increase imports of LNG, the liquefied natural gas, correct? Now, I
Yes.
presume I mention this because well, I'd like your opinion on supply chain fragility. What does this mean? Increased imports of LNG for Europe?
Thank you. Thank you for your question because this is the key to understand the world energy policy. Thank you. Gas is abundant in the world, was abundant, but in the Europe, we were nearly obliged to buy gas to the neighboring countries. It's why we import gas from Algeria, from Norway, and of course from Russia. But the LNG changed completely the gas market in the world. Now you can buy gas wherever you want because it's transported by boat, and you can buy gas from Australia, and you can buy gas from Trinidad and Tobago, or you can buy gas from Israel or USA. And this is giving a lot of freedom to the market. Of course, it's a little bit more expensive than the Russian gas because you need to liquefy, to transport. It's a little bit more expensive. But there is no price for the security of supply. There is no price for geopolitical freedom. And so the big change of all energy policy has been to recognize the development of LNG. It's not new. LNG is not a new technology. The first plant in Europe has been built in 1968 in Barcelona. So you see, it's quite old. But at that time, there
Mm.
was not a lot of country fighting to produce gas and therefore LNG. Today, you can buy LNG wherever you want in the world. And therefore, we don't need Russian gas. So the security of supply should have been to say we will import more LNG and therefore we need LNG terminal. Do you know how many LNG terminal at Germany before the war in Ukraine? Zero.
Let zero. I
Zero.
was going to guess zero. Yeah,
Zero.
Spain has a lot right now.
The Green didn't want to have one LNG terminal because they say no, we don't need gas. Everything we should be wind and solar. So no LNG terminal. This is the big strategic mistake of the Germans to refuse to have one safety valve to import immediately gas from wherever in the world. So the LNG has changed the energy geopolitics.
Right, and that's good for Europe, therefore.
Yes, exactly. This is extremely good. It's why at your first question about energy crisis, I told you that there is no crisis in the world because we have all the energy that we want. The only crisis in Europe because we have invented this theory of the decarbonization and net zero. The other are not doing that. Nobody is crazy to
Hmm.
say that we will do net zero.
And I'm curious, to what extent have sanctions, thinking in particular of sanctions against Russia, changed Europe and its energy flows? Because I've been reading and writing about how Russia has been circumventing sanctions by selling more oil to India, which then refines the oil and sells it back to Europe. To what extent do sanctions hurt Europe, and to what extent do they hurt Russia? Some people say the sanctions are basically Europe shooting itself in the foot. Is that true?
Certainly for the price of energy. Because the price of energy have jumped after the war, not because of the war, as I say, but the consequence is an increase of price of the imported energy in Europe. So this is certainly true. But even more, we have put an embargo, total embargo on oil in Europe, but not on gas. We still import Russian gas in Europe, not as much as
Right.
before, but we still import gas because, of course, we need gas. It's just impossible to stop to burn gas in Europe and in the world. So we import gas from Russia. But because, Mr. Putin is not stupid, he knows that the future for him is not the pipeline to transport gas, but LNG because with LNG he can sell Russian gas everywhere in the world. And so the Russia has developed the Yamal terminal in the Yamal Peninsula and is exporting LNG in many countries in the world. And probably some of this gas is coming back in Europe with changing just the origin coming from India, for example, or Pakistan, and still being Russian gas. So yes, the need for gas is so high in the world that there is no problem for Mr. Putin to place his gas.
Now, perhaps to end, let's talk politics and the collapse. I think it's fair to say of the Green vote. We saw it in the European elections, and we've seen it since in elections in Germany, for example. I'm wondering to what extent this Green policy and the emphasis on alternative fuels, the overemphasis that you've been talking about, could change now that the Greens seem to be losing some support. I know that in the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, the Commission president, was reappointed with the help of the Greens, so their influence persists. But it seems as if the electorate, at least, have turned against Green policy. Do you think this will impact EU energy policy over the next decade?
To be frank with you, I've been surprised that the Greens have resisted in Strasbourg. I was really thinking with a lot of friends that they will plummeted much more. But they resisted. It's mainly in Germany and in Belgium that they lose vote. But in the other countries, it was not so disastrous, and so they are still in the parliament. But this comes with a surprise because you don't forget the huge discontent of the farmer in Europe with the green policy.
Mm.
Uh, but I guess that the nobody in the well, I correct that. Not all politicians have understood the dramatic situation of the farmer. Excuse me if I take 1 second. The day that the tractors were in Brussels, the
I
very
remember.
same the very same day, the Commission issued a paper saying that by 2040 we should reduce by 90% the CO2 emissions. So you see the blindness. Farmer in the street, and the same day they insist that we should do more. Really, it's how is it possible to lose this sense of politics? And with the maintain of the majority for Mrs. von der Leyen, mainly also because the Spanish Popular Party have increased in Spain and recover its position and make the PPE stronger than in the previous legislation. So Mrs. von der Leyen have the same majority as before. And this is surprising because really your question is evident. We perceive that people do not want to be imposed a policy which is destroying freedom and quality of life. You look at in the election in Germany. All the Länder election in Germany are disastrous for the Green, to the point that today or yesterday, the direction of the Grünen announced that they will dismiss
They
because they
resigned.
cannot
Right.
resign. Sorry, thank you. They will resign because they disappear from the regional parliament except one. So that means that yes, why is that? Is because people start to realize that what we call green, first of all, is not green. It's importing material from China and losing competitiveness. We are losing competitiveness. This is the subtitle of my last book. We are organizing the destruction of the EU competitiveness. And I'm not the only one to say that. So people have understood and they want something different. The problem is that the Commission, Mrs. von der Leyen, is still in power with the same majority. Of course, during the 5 years, a lot of things can be different in Strasbourg because even if she has a majority, there is also a stronger opposition than in the past. But I don't know how long we will continue like that, to continue to believe that everything will be green when everything will be based on material and fossil fuel.
That's great. That's fantastic. Professor Furfari, many thanks for your time. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you very much to you. Thanks for the invitation.
And thanks for watching.